This is the tale of first orchestra of Paleolithic age, not of violins or drums, but of bones, stones, fire and wind, played by hands that knew no notes, and feet that danced before rhythm had a name. Dear listeners, welcome to my channel Sleep and History. If you want to know how music was truly born, not from paper or stage, but from hunt and hunger and heartbeat, then subscribe to the channel. Because what you're about to hear was not made to entertain. It was made to survive, to speak without words, to bring people closer under the dark sky, and it all began with a knock, a breath, and a circle of tired souls around a fire. The rhythm grew without a plan. No one told the others what to play or how to follow, but hands moved on their own, knocking, scraping, clapping, tapping. Bones hit stones in slow repeating beats. Dry wood struck flat rock, sharp and high. A bird bone, hollow from the hunt, was raised to the lips. Wind passed through it by chance, and it whistled like a voice. A few heads turned, eyes wide. One boy tried the same with a different bone. It didn't work, but he smiled anyway. They were learning, not by words but by listening, by feeling how sound changed when bone met rock or hand met wood. These were not musicians, not by any rule we know today, but something deep inside them was waiting, something ancient and hidden that only needed one knock to come alive. They had always known sound, the crack of branches, the growl of beasts, the rustle of leaves, but now they were shaping sound with their own hands, not to warn, not to fight, not to hunt, but just to create. There were no instruments in the way we think today, but there were tools of sound. A turtle shell filled with seeds became a shaker. A flat rock placed near the fire gave off sharp cracks. When tapped, a stick dragged across dry bark made a scratchy beat that others followed. Even the fire joined in, crackling louder when the wind picked up. It was music built from nature itself, nothing carved, nothing tuned, just found, held and played. This moment wasn't planned, it came at the end of a hunt, in a moment of rest. But something about it felt different, the way their hands moved, the way their eyes watched each other. This was the first orchestra, not with rows or leaders, but with rhythm that passed from hand to hand, from rock to bone to bark to shell. And they kept going, one would stop, and another would start. The sounds rose and fell like breath. Some played slow, deep beats like the ground itself was speaking. Others tapped fast, sharp sounds that danced in the air. They made patterns, without knowing what patterns were, repeating beats, copying rhythms, changing them again. It was sound turning into memory, sound turning into meaning. A young girl took a long bone and tapped both ends like a drum. She smiled when it made to. Different tones, one higher, one lower. A man added a beat with his palm on his chest, soft and low like a heart. Soon two children were dancing with their feet hitting the dirt. Dust lifted up around their ankles as they moved with the beat. No one told them to. The rhythm was pulling their bodies. They followed it because it felt right, because something old inside them understood it. No one knew what they had created, but it made the night warmer. It made the dark less quiet. It made the group feel like one whole thing, not just people sitting near a fire, but a circle bound by sound. And this was not the only night it happened. The next time the hunters came back, someone picked up the same bone, tapped it, scraped it, blew through it, and again the sounds began, not the same as before, but close, a memory of rhythm. Passed from one fire to the next, not with words, but with bones and stones and wind. They didn't write it down, they didn't give it a name, but they remembered it with their hands. Each beat was a thread that tied them together, and slowly, beat by beat, sound became something more. It became joy, it became story, it became something to look forward to. This was music before music. This was the world's first orchestra. Built not by kings or scholars, but by the tired hands of hunters, by children with stones, by women with shells, by firelight and instinct and breath. And in that moment, without knowing it, they changed what it meant to be human, because now They didn't just survive the night, they filled it with rhythm, with voice, with the music of bones and stones. They did not give it a name, but what they had started that night was not a game. It was the beginning of something real, something that would grow and travel and echo through time. The beat of stones and bones did not end when the fire burned out. It moved with them to new valleys, new caves, new places they had never seen before. When the tribe moved, they carried meat and tools, but now they also carried hollow bones. Smooth rocks, sticks with notches, the sounds had become important more than noise. They gave a feeling that even when the world was cold and wild, there was still something inside them that could create. They started noticing which bones made deeper sounds, which stones gave sharper knocks. One boy tied to long dry ribs with a piece of gut. He held them in the air and beat them against each other. They made a soft clatter like wood in the wind. He danced while doing it, and others laughed, but that sound stuck in their ears. Later, someone copied it with their own bones. They had made the first kind of clapper in another group, far across the plains. A girl stretched dried animal skin across a bowl-shaped rock. She used sinew to tie. It tied, then tapped it with a thick stick. It gave a dull, deep sound like thunder far away. She tapped it again and again. The sound was steady, powerful. They had made a drum. None of them called it music. They didn't have a word for it, but they knew it made their hearts beat faster, their heads nod, their feet move. It made the cold night feel less lonely. It brought quiet mouths to smile. It brought silent people to speak through sound. Caves became their gathering places, not just for safety from wind and animals, but for sound. Certain caves had perfect echo. When they shouted or hit a drum, the cave answered back with long, deep tones. They would paint the walls, then play inside them as if the cave itself was alive, as if the walls were singing too. One day, in a hidden valley, a young boy filled an old skull with dry seeds. He shook it out of boredom. It rattled. He shook it again. He ran through the camp shaking it and laughing. Others joined in with their own rattles made from bark or shells. It was wild, sharp, exciting. They had made the first shakers. Some people tied different-sized bones to a branch. When the wind blew, they knocked together. They made a sound like light rain or teeth chattering. It sounded like the world was whispering. They called it the voice of the wind. They hung it near the entrance of their shelter to keep bad spirits away, or maybe just to remind them they were not alone. Years passed, tools changed, fires got bigger, but the sound remained. It grew richer, deeper, more layered. People began to copy bird calls using hollow reeds. They blew softly through them. Some made sharp high notes, others low and breathy. They laughed and did it again. They were learning breath control. They were learning tone. The earliest flutes were born this way, some made from bird bone, others from mammoth ivory, tiny holes drilled with stone tools. They blew through them and changed the notes by covering the holes. One such flute was found thousands of years later, buried in a cave in modern-day Germany. Over 40,000 years old, still shaped, still hollow, still with its tiny holes. Proof that music lived before writing, before farming, before metal. In harsh winters when movement was hard, they sat indoors and made sounds together. They scraped stones slowly, tapped logs, rubbed sticks, made rhythms that passed time and lifted spirits. It was their way of staying warm in more than just body. It was how they kept their minds alive. Children learned by watching. Mothers hummed soft melodies while feeding them, not words, just rising and falling tones. That humming stayed with the children. Later, they hummed to their own, a loop that never broke, a memory carried by sound. There were no performances, no stages, but there were rituals. Before big hunts, they played loud rhythms. They jumped and stamped, beat stones together, made themselves feel strong. Before burial, the tones were soft, slow, full of breath and silence. They honored their dead with sound. They sent them off. not with words but with feeling, and then something bigger happened. Two groups met far from their homelands. They had different ways of speaking, different tools. But one man hit a stone. The other nodded and did the same. They made rhythm. The fire crackled. Others joined. That night, two tribes who could not talk made music together. It broke fear, built trust. Sound had become a bridge. As the years moved on, music became part of identity. Each tribe had its own rhythms, its own favorite sounds. Some liked fast clapping, others liked deep drums. Some carved whistles with 2 holes, others strung dry plant fibers and plucked them like strings, but all had music, all had sound, all had feeling. Even nature joined them. They used river stones for their shapes and sounds. They copied owl calls and bat sounds at night. They turned sticks into wind flutes. They noticed how rain made rhythm on leaves, and they copied it with fingers on skin. Every part of life became music. One group near the sea found shells that whistled when blown. They carried them inland. Others saw and copied. Music moved not just by foot, but by trade. Sound became part of the journey of ideas, of things passed hand to hand, tribe to tribe. It was no longer just survival. It was expression, a way to say I am here, a way to say we are still alive, a way to say this moment matters. And though no one wrote it down, though the wind has carried most of it away, the traces remain in caves, in bones, in forgotten corners of the earth, where once, long ago, a group of people sat by the fire, holding bones and stones, and turned silence into music. For the first time in all of history, that was their orchestra. That was their legacy. And we still carry its beat inside us today. Even if we no longer know its name,